Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amidabits, Namo Amidabits, Namo Amidabits, Namondaps, Namondaps, Namondaps. Good morning, and thank you for joining me on this Sunday. I hope that you are doing well and staying healthy. Today, what I want to talk about are last words. And what I mean by last words are, of course, the last words that an individual says before they pass away. Now, in a lot of ways, the last lines that a person says are not that important. They do not define who you are as a person or anything like that. However, what they do provide is an opportunity for the rest of us to think about what they mean and reflect on the ways that we have shared experiences with every other human being on this planet. There are a lot of really interesting last words throughout history, and I'm going to share a few of them with you. So first of all, the first one I want to share is George Harrison, the the quiet, calm Beatle, who was very Zen-like in a lot of ways. His supposed last words were, "Love one another." Second is Groucho Marx, the comedian, always on point. His last words were, "This is no way to live." Voltaire, the iconoclast, the man of logic and reason, who defied religious institutions his entire life in favor of enlightenment, he was asked to renounce the devil on his deathbed, and his final last words were, "This is no time to be making enemies." Jack Daniels, fittingly, last words were, "One more drink, please." Pancho Villa, the Mexican revolutionary, who was gunned down somewhat abruptly, his last words were also equally abrupt and not really planned out. His last words were, "Don't let it end like this. Please tell them I said something." Then there's Winston Churchill, best known for his, of course, like his dry wit and cleverness. Well, supposedly his last words were, "I am bored with it all." And then of course comes to one more. And these aren't exactly the last words of the individual, but they are the last tweet that the individual sent out. And the words were, "A life is like a garden. Perfect moments can be had, but not preserved, except in memory." And these words were, of course, tweeted out by Leonard Nimoy, Spock from Star Trek. So, throughout all of quarantine, my wife and I have had one constant in our lives, besides our dog Remy, and that is Star Trek. We've watched basically a ton of Star Trek, and when I say that we've watched a ton of Star Trek, that's not doing it justice. We've watched a ton of Star Trek. We've watched all of Next Gen, all of Deep Space Nine's, vast majority of Voyager, a ton of the new stuff, and then like a decent chunk of the old stuff as well. We have basically been just like binging Star Trek since day one. And throughout all of this, my favorite character has been and continues to be Leonard Nimoy's Spock. Leonard Nimoy, who is, of course, not with us today. Spock was my father's favorite character as well. And the reason that I like Spock so much is because, Nimoy played him in a way that was very humanizing. I mean, if you think about most of the alien sidekicks that you usually get, they're supposed to be kind of like cheesy and campy, right? They're supposed to get in trouble, eat some ticks, say clever one-liners, get in fights, meditate, do crazy things. But Nimoy, he played the character in a way that was really relatable. I mean, think about this. You're talking about a character that doesn't show emotion. That doesn't make sense. We shouldn't be able to connect to that. We should not be able to connect to someone that doesn't show feeling, because we usually reserve that type of thing for like, psychopaths, monsters, those sorts of things. But Nimoy played that character in a way that made Spock seem more human than many of his human counterparts on the show. Whenever I think about his last words, life is like a garden. Perfect moments can be had but not preserved except in memory. They always stick with me. Because, first of all, as a simile, they carry a ton of weight. And they touch on something that isn't just a summarization of life, but something universal that we as individuals of any culture can understand. I mean, a garden, just take that on its face, it's constantly changing. It's always growing flowers, vegetables are always growing in it. Okay? But to say that it is ever perfect, it's never perfect because it's ephemeral, right? Because the beauty is directly tied to its growth, and the growth is tied to death. It's tied to rebirth, to the countless organisms that make it up. It's the process of care and contemplation, but it's also a microcosm for the overarching rules that govern our world as a whole. We ourselves are temporary parts of this world, and we are also, through the actions of our lives and even our death, intertwined with everything and everyone else around us, right? It's Jodo Shinshu 101. And of course, in Jodo Shinshu, we believe that when our life comes to an end, we're reborn as a Buddha. Now, not be in the traditional sense necessarily, but in the sense that we transcend our sense of ego and our desire, right? We become aware of the interconnectedness of life and how this interchanges with impermanence. And we also accept this idea that in becoming a Buddha, our lives, our memory helps others come to the same realization. We teach the Dharma in life and I believe that Nimoy's words embody this sentiment very well. Now, Nimoy himself was not a Buddhist, right? He was very devoutly Jewish. He wrote about the subject of Judaism in great detail on many occasions, and even crafted the traditional live long and prosper symbol out of the blessing that his rabbi would use. Now, more than this, the show itself, Star Trek as a whole, is all about renouncing like a lot of the things that separate societies, right? It self-identifies as a non-religious show. The exact goal of the Federation is to transcend draconian beliefs and, anything that caused war or suffering at one point in time, whether it was economics, whether it was race, whether it was religion or anything. Now, that being said, I do believe that the intentions of the show or the religious predispositions of Nimoy do not necessarily change the meaning of his words in the way that I see them. I believe that these differences make the teachings of Buddhism all that much more universal. What I mean is that the rules of the world and the experiences that we all share don't change. Nimoy's words teach me that whether someone is Buddhist or Christian or Jewish or pagan, whether someone is human or not, we are all participating in a similar experience. And that similar experience is, of course, a reflection of our time here on this planet together. Even before the evolutionary development of cognizance, we have been wrangling with death, trying to understand death, of cause and effect. We have been attempting to search for answers in all of life. And the truth of the matter might simply be that these aren't questions, but simply part of the process. We live in an impermanent and interconnected world. It is a world that is full of suffering and pain, but also with the potential for so much beauty. The Buddha did not create the world that we live in either. But what we believe is that the Buddha merely came to understand what it was. Life, death, interconnectedness, impermanence. This is the truth that the Buddha came to understand. And how we deal with it, that's up to us. And whether you choose to learn from the experiences of Leonard Nimoy or a Catholic priest or your ancestors or your pets, from the Buddhist perspective, you are still participating in the Buddhist experience. And I believe this is explanatory of the idea that 84,000 Dharma gates, as in that there are limitless ways to become enlightened in the minds of the Buddhist faith. I also believe that these ways are not necessarily the most doctrinal, not necessarily Buddhist in category. Consider the last lines of our founder, Shinran Shonin, founder of Jodo Shinshu. Late into his 60s, Shinran began a new life, returning to Kyoto to devote his final 3 decades of writing. He stopped giving sermons or teaching disciples by this time, and at this point in his life was just living with relatives, right? He was supported by the gifts of his followers, right? He was living in the Kanto area, and he was just writing. He wrote the Kyogo Shinshu during this time. He wrote all the hymns that make up our current collective works of Shinran that we read every week. And they passed away in 1263. And it's interesting because these were his last words. Though I return to the pure land of eternal peace after my life is at an end, yet shall I return to this world again and again, just as the waves of the Wakanor Bay return to the beach. So that when you rejoice in the Nembutsu, consider that two actually rejoice. And when you rejoice with another, consider that there are three, and that other is Shinran. Thank you. Namo Ami Dabutsu. Thank you, right? Namo Ami Dabutsu. The ending of his life is just so full of gratitude. And the last words that he has are just about this idea of coming back to help others, to be part of others, to help people understand the world that we live in, because we share it. The thing is, doesn't matter what you really believe, because in the end, Buddhism isn't a devout practice about rules and regulations, of scriptures and check marks. Buddhism is at its core the realization that the world operates a certain way and that we as individuals in it harmoniously exist within it, with one another. It is an experience of reflection, one that only asks us to think about the world around us and learn from those who come before. The last words of a person are, in the long run, not that important. Because you cannot ever summarize the totality of a life, how it has affected others, how it has been experienced by others, in all of its weight, its pride, its failure, its beauty, its success, its ugliness, and its joy. What is important is how a life was lived, remembered, and how this helps others throughout that experience. Please join me in Gasho. Life is like a garden. Perfect moments can be had, but not preserved, except in memory. Namo Amidabutsu, Namo Amidabutsu, Namo Amidabutsu, Namon Daps, Namon Daps, Namon Daps.